My husband, he works in an office, and I'm totally okay with it. So imagine my surprise when he comes home and tells me, "Honey, I'm quitting my job because I'm going to make it as an actor." Well, I didn't believe him and I thought he was crazy. But what do you know? 2 weeks later, he comes back with a giant role that he's going to star in this new movie. But he has another secret he hasn't told me yet. I always thought a wife should be supportive, but that's until the husband goes totally crazy. My husband and I have been married for 9 years. We married really young, right out of high school, and we thought we would go through the world together. Well, we knew each other in high school, and we knew that both of us come from pretty modest means, and I never wanted him to be some millionaire. I only cared that he loved me and that he did his best to provide, and in those 9 years, we went through every problem a married couple could ever go through. Right out from high school, my husband got a normal job, just crunching data at a computer. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills. For the most part, we could say at least, and we lived with his elderly mother for our first 4 years, but she passed away. So we didn't have to rent. I didn't have much of a problem with our life, as I cared about was him, and getting through everything together. But he, on the other hand, almost came off like he wanted way more. When we were in high school, my husband always dreamed about becoming an actor. Ever since drama class, we always told him it was a ridiculous target, and that very few people can actually do it. But to be fair, he was good. He did a lot of school plays, and we were always impressed, but he didn't really have the traditional hunk look, so we never really thought that he could actually make it, and becoming an actor here in Sweden was much harder than in Hollywood. When we got married, I thought that dream was over, seeing as he had big responsibilities now, and he spent a good few years without even talking about it, until about last year. I was making breakfast in the morning when my husband comes in all excited, which by the way was very unusual for him in the morning. He tells me that they were shooting this TV series here in our neighborhood, and that they were asking for extras. I told him that was great, but how could he do it since he was working and he just surprised me by telling me that he took the day off? I thought it was ridiculous that he took the day off work just to be some extra that probably won't even be seen on television. But I thought I'd humor him since he had wanted this for so long. He went off to sign up, that the hours went by, and it got very late, and I was getting worried. I called him over 30 times, and he did not pick up until he came back home at 1 a.m. I was about to explode, but he had the biggest smile on his face. He told me how he first signed up to just be a passerby in the street, but he had met with the director and convinced him to give him 2 lines. Well, I told him that's great, but that I was worried and that it was late. He didn't seem to care. He stayed up all night and got to work very messy in the morning, and I was getting worried that this dream would consume him all over again. Over the next few days, all he did was watch actor interviews on his phone. He barely talked to me, just kept up with who did what. About a month later, he told me that he got in touch with an acting agent and that he was auditioning for an actual role in a movie. Okay, I thought this was just simply getting ridiculous. So I told him that this was just taking up his time and asked him about his job, and he just told me that he would not need that job if he was making millions from acting. I tried to convince him that this was a bad idea, but he would not give up. I was even more shocked when he did get the part. That's right. 2 weeks later, he got the part. He was over the moon, but I was worried. I sat down with him in the kitchen to try to figure out what he would do, and he told me that he would try to shoot the movie at night since his scenes are mostly indoors and keep up with work in the morning. Well, I told him that's pretty much impossible, but he told me I didn't know what I was talking about and that it would work. Obviously, it didn't. Over the next 2 months, he missed out on more days of work than he attended and spent all day outside shooting the movie. A month later, I get a call from his boss at work telling, me that it's time to tell him that he was fired. I went over to the movie set to tell him, and he seemed so invested in the acting. I tried to find a private spot, but nowhere was private. I was shaking and worried, and when I told him, he didn't really care, and told me that he'd make tons more from the movie. I asked him how he would do that, and how would we get by until then. And the argument got heated, and people started staring. He signaled 2 guys to come and tell me that I had to leave the set, and I could not believe he was basically kicking me out. I was 100% right, and things got way worse for us. Bills piled up, and I had no idea what to do, so I went over to stay with my brother and his wife for a couple of weeks until my husband figured out what he was going to do. He barely even called me and did not visit me once while I was at my brother's, until 4 months went by. The movie came out and was apparently a pretty big hit. All of a sudden, my husband was doing magazine interviews. I could feel him getting into that kind of lifestyle now. Even if he was still an unknown foreign actor and did not even get to Hollywood, eventually, he finally came over to my brother's house to apologize for not being in contact. And he told me that we would be moving into this big fancy house because he landed a lead role in a movie. I was getting more and more worried, but a part of me did find it cool that our life would be stepping up. A week later, we did move, right into that big house he was talking about, and it was the stuff out of dreams. It was big, fancy, and even had a pool and everything. I was trying to be supportive, but it was getting harder. The night we moved in, though, my husband told me that there was some kind of dinner party we were supposed to go to. Well, I was fine with going. But then he shocked me when I got all dressed up, asking me if I had something nicer to wear. I mean, come on, I felt embarrassed and told him that this was the dress I wore to most weddings. He even made some comment about how it got tighter than before. I felt really self-conscious, but we went anyways, and I could just feel everybody staring at me weirdly. One Barbie-looking girl just kept asking me where I got my clothes from, and another asked me about makeup and spas. They would keep whispering to each other and just laughing, and it felt awful. Especially with my husband not doing or saying anything to stand up for me. When we got back, I told him how awful I felt, and how embarrassed and angry I was, but he was extremely condescending. Instead of trying to make me feel better, he just told me that I don't have to go to these things anymore if I don't like them. Well, I told him that he didn't even try to defend me or make me feel wanted in any way. But he kept telling me that he himself felt small next to the big stars and was just keeping to himself. Well then, I didn't buy it, but at least he never invited me to any event, dinner, or party ever again. What I did not expect, however, is how lonely that big old house would be. My husband was home like 1 or 2 nights a week and usually, arrived when I already went to sleep. We would go some days, sometimes weeks, without having a meal together, and phone calls would go even rarer. I had moved away from my friends and family for him, and he was never even here. I felt awful about everything, and any time I tried to talk to him about it, he'd be even more condescending than before and act as this was all worth the money and fame. Well, this was only the beginning of the horrible things about to come. One day, he got home and looked completely zoned out. I kept asking him what was wrong, and he just said that he had too much fun at a party. He looked way more than drunk. His eyes were red, and he could barely speak. He passed out on the couch in his clothes, and nothing woke him up. He was dead asleep. I was worried. So I searched through his jacket and found a packet of what looked like powder. I definitely thought it was drugs. And the way he was acting, it would not have surprised me. The more I examined him, though, the more I found marks on his neck, like love bites. I knew what had happened, and I stayed up all night crying. The next day, he woke up hungover and very irritable. I showed him the packet of drugs and told him that it dropped out of his jacket, so he grabbed it quickly and told me that it was a prop from the movie that he forgot to return. I asked him what was on his neck, and he snapped, asking me why am I interrogating him at 7 a.m. before breakfast. Then he stormed off. I knew he wasn't being faithful, and I just had to prove it. Before that night, I had planned on moving back home and finding a place to stay and just moving away from all this, but I felt so hurt that I wanted to take this further and get revenge, if possible. I'd gone through so much with him and supported him through so much, and I was not going to let this slide. So the next day, he came home and I acted all perfect. I made him dinner, sat down just to try to get some info, and I pretended everything was fine and asked him what he was up to and how the movie was going. He told me everything was going good and that this will be his major break that he's been waiting on. I kept faking being impressed until he left after dinner, so I followed him in a cab. We drove for about an hour until we reached a very exotic-looking house in the middle of nowhere. He got in, but I stayed outside and hid just to try to find out what was going on. There were a ton of girls, some semi-popular actors, actresses, and shockingly, what looked to be 12, 13-year-olds, whom I assumed were child actors. I kept looking through the windows. I'm talking drugs, alcohol. It was everywhere like crazy. People were publicly being intimate in front of the children, so I pulled out my phone and just decided to record, thinking it might come in handy for something. Well, I spotted my husband with some girls and almost blew my cover when I saw him handing some of those packets to those teenagers. I got everything on video and bolted before anybody even noticed. This wasn't enough, though. I wanted to completely break down this fake world. I knew he was having another dinner party a day later, so I decided to just crash it and show up uninvited. It was in some fancy restaurant, and he was already there and looked to be very intimate with his co-star, who, by the way, was sitting right beside him. I showed up and said hi, and the look on his face was priceless. I introduced myself, and everyone was shocked to find out who I was, telling me that they did not know my husband was even married. It came as a shock to many, and that's exactly how I wanted it to be. The whole time, he was visibly uncomfortable, and I was living for it. There were quite a few semi-important people from our country at the table, so I just put my friendliest face and started telling everyone stories. The embarrassing marriage kind. For about an hour, I was telling everyone 8 years worth of stories showcasing how much of a loser he can be, and they found it hilarious. Soon enough, he was the butt of the joke at the table, and I could see him getting more and more frustrated until he told everyone that it was a good time and forced us to leave. On the ride back home, he was yelling and screaming about how embarrassed he felt, and just kept condemning me for showing up unannounced. Well, I told him firstly, I was his wife and should be in the public light with him. Second, that's exactly how I felt when he first took me to one of those events and did nothing to defend me. As soon as we got home, he told me that he wants a divorce. I told him I already knew he was sleeping with his co-star, and he went on a rant about how he should, because this is the life of fame. He kept telling me how the director was an idiot and how he was having a hard time on the movie set, and how some of his co-stars were, well, he used some very colorful words, and that he needed someone to support him through this, and I wasn't there. I was genuinely baffled to the point where I left. Then I just packed my bag and decided to head home. What he didn't know, however, was that I had everything recorded on my phone, and there's a certain group that just loves this kind of controversy. That's right, the paparazzi. I got in touch with some tabloids and publications. It's in Sweden, so it's our equivalent of TMZ. And I've taken it to the party. The video was on the internet a day later, and it was like a bomb had gone off. Everyone on the interwebs was going crazy over what happened, calling the actors, including my husband, groomers, and horrible people who deserved to go to prison. Apparently, an investigation was opened, and it was a PR nightmare. Some agents tried to come out and say the whole thing's fabricated or AI, but it was very clearly real. My husband was in hot water, but that was only the beginning. I waited a bit for the video to do its job, and then I leaked the next bombshell. The audio recording of my husband insulting the director and actors of his new movie. At that point, it was very clearly me who did this, since there was no one else around with us, so he called me the same day, but I kept hanging up even after 126 calls. I just waited for the fire to spread, and soon enough, after interviewers were eating him alive over what he said and the video, he was fired from the movie he was shooting, and the news reports pointed to a recasting. At this point, I didn't know exactly what he was doing and how he was coping, but I was sure it was horrible. The story was all over the news of investigations into production companies distributing drugs to minors, and several names got involved. I was shocked when my husband showed up at my brother's house. Though looking absolutely terrible, he was extremely aggressive and told me that I was ruining his life and that I could do this to him. I told him that he did not appreciate how much I stood by him all those years and just decided to be a cheating junkie. He was getting louder and louder, telling me that he regrets ever marrying me in the first place because he was young and an idiot. And out of nowhere, my brother shows up, punches him in the face, and pins him to the floor. He tells him that he's a coward and not a real man, and that he should be ashamed of himself. My brother kicked my husband out, and we both knew that he had nowhere left to go except for his mother's old house. But there's no way he'd be showing up there with the paparazzi on his tail. They followed him around everywhere, and when he had to go home, the pictures came out calling him a hack. After this whole thing went down, I decided to do an interview in secret with a magazine, talking about my experience. They told me that my husband's career was ruined, and that there'd be no way he'd ever work in the movie industry again. I told them my side of the story and why I had to do what I did. I lived with my brother for a little bit until I found my own job and gained a footing in life. And I never heard from my husband ever again.
Wow. Okay, so this story pretty much blew up. I did not think that it was going to play out this way. I mean, OP grooming little kids and going to a party like that? I just seriously didn't see that coming. Guys, I would like to know. Say, for instance, you were in OP's position and you were going through this and it was your husband. How the heck are you going to deal with this situation? Please drop your comments down below. Let's talk about it. I will see you guys in the comment section. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, my name's Mr. Reddito. I post stories every single day. So if you want to go ahead and take a break from work, or maybe you're running on the treadmill, driving down to the Starbucks, go ahead and pop on a story. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a fantastic day.